Today is officially the day that we blow the budget on the budget crawler project. So I was browsing through Facebook the other day and found a deal on some axles that was just too good to pass up. Now, we could run the budget crawler as is with the Dana 35 in the rear and the Dana 30 in front with the Aussie locker, and it would probably be fine. But I came across these axles and figured they were worth picking up. So what we have here is a high pinion Dana 30 out of a Cherokee or a Comanche. The guy seemed to think it was out of Comanche, but I don't know. They're basically the same. And then we have a Ford 8.8 here that was 4-linked to go in the back of a Cherokee. And these have a bunch of gear on them that supposedly makes it worth what I paid. I haven't actually verified that any of this stuff is on here, so I'll go through what the guy told me it has. Obviously, we've got drilled and slotted rotors on both sets of axles. He said there are superior chromoly axle shafts, front and rear. I only see a sticker on this one. I didn't see one on the other side, and I've seen no evidence of there being chromoly shafts up front. So hopefully it has chromoly shafts, but if not, oh well. The front axle, we've got this high steer kit, which I'm not sure if I'll be able to use because I'm not running any lift currently on the budget crawler. I may go up to 2 inches or so, and even that I don't think is going to be enough to run this. So we may have to run stock steering, but this is the Teraflex Aluminum steering kit, and I should be able to get a good amount of money back out of it if I decide to sell it. What else do we have? Some kind of upgraded ball joints. I can't remember what they are, but supposedly they're decent. And I've got this, obviously, so this was on a Cherokee, and to get big tires on a Cherokee, you need to put a lot of lift, which results in the high steer kits and a really high track bar bracket. So you see the high track bar bracket here. I don't think I'll be able to use that either, but the stock bracket is still in there, so we should be good. This was originally a vacuum disconnect axle. The vacuum disconnect was deleted. Obviously, it'd be better if it was not ever a vacuum disconnect axle, but since it was, we'll just run with it. We've got solid diff covers front and rear, the supposedly ARB lockers front and rear. I see air fittings, so I figure they're either ARBs or zip lockers. Either one should be fine. The front axle uses all the stock TJ, XJ suspension setup. The rear was 4-linked, so we're going to have to redo some brackets on that to get that in the TJ with stock mounts, because I'm not really looking to 4-link this thing right now. And I think that's pretty much it. So the way I see it, these axles have about $4,000 worth of gear in them, if everything the guy told me is true. And I paid $1,600, so I think I got a pretty good deal. One other thing, they do have 488 gears front and rear, which is what I was going for on this Jeep anyway. So let's get them in the garage and tear them apart. Today we officially begin the axle swap, and I'm going to start with the front end on this one because that's going to be the easier one to do. The rear end, we're going to have to cut this truss off, this mini truss, and put a full truss on so we can get the factory brackets for TJ on there. So let's get this front axle off the trailer and strip it down. A couple things we got to do to take these bump stop extensions off. I'm going to pull off this track bar here because we'll be using the factory one still. This steering system should come off because the geometry is going to be terrible with this factory track bar, but I may leave it on for now and see if I can get away with it, take it for a ride down the road and see how bad it actually is. If it's terrible, then we'll just go back to factory steering and we'll probably upgrade that. And other than that, I think we're going to have to swap the diff cover to the aftermarket one that I have on the Dana 30 and the Jeep already. It's the Poison Spider Bombshell cover and is compatible with a factory track bar. And I don't believe this solid diff cover is compatible with the factory track bar. And other than that, we should be pretty good to go. And there we have it with everything removed. I went ahead and touched up the coil perches with some black paint. It's kind of dark in here, so it's hard to tell, which is also why I'm only filming a limited amount of this. I know it's not too enjoyable to watch dark video. So the next thing we need to do is get the old axle out. Now taking this axle off is actually pretty simple. We've got a lower control arm, an upper control arm, shock, and then we'll have to do something with the brakes. I'll probably just pop the brake caliper off and hang that to the side for now. And this will be the same thing on the other side, so that's all it's holding each side on. And then up front we've got the steering that connects to the steering box. I'll probably just pop that off right there. And then we get the track bar that connects up to the frame. and I'll probably disconnect that from the axle and leave it connected to the frame. So let's get all this disconnected and get the new one in. Old axle is out, and we're ready to put the new axle in. However, before I do that, I'm going to get under here and clean up a little bit of the rust. I had a video a while back where I cleaned up the whole frame and repainted it. And there were a few spots I couldn't get to because the springs were in the way, like right there, or the axle just made it difficult to get up in there. So right now I'm just going to grab the angle grinder with a wire wheel on it. We're going to clean all this up, put some etching primer on, and then coat it with some black paint. And just like that, we've got the axle in place. All the control arm bolts are in place. They're not tightened down yet. I'll wait until the weight is on the suspension to tighten those down. The track bar's on. The springs currently aren't in because I'm working on kind of cycling this axle up and down just to see how things touch and bind and whatnot, since this is a totally new setup in here. And one issue that we're running into, which I totally expected, is this drag link that goes from the steering knuckle up to the steering box is not at a good angle. So something's going to need to change there. Ideally, we want the drag link to be parallel to the track bar right here. So you can see the track bar attaches right up to the frame right there and down to the axle right there. And in order to minimize bump steer, the more parallel those are, the better off we'll be. And they're kind of going opposite directions right now. So I think this is where the axle is going to sit roughly at ride height. It may be a little bit higher up, which is just going to tilt that down even more. So the only option I can think of right now, other than going back to stock steering, is to try to find a Pitman arm for the steering box that's a little more flat. From this angle, we can really tell how much the factory Pitman arm drops down. So if I can find one that goes straight, I think that's going to help out our case here. I did a little bit of research, and I think I can get one out of a Wagoneer that's going to be pretty flat, and it's going to be a little longer as well, so that'll help raise up the drag link a little bit more. And besides the Pitman arm, there are two other things we need to do here off the top of my head. First of all, we need to swap out this diff cover. So I can't actually get this axle up to full stuff right now up against the bump stops because the differential cover is making contact with the factory track bar. And the diff cover I had on the other axle that came out of here is designed to clear the track bar. So I'll just swap out this diff cover with the Poison Spider Bombshell diff cover that I had on the other axle, and that should solve that problem. And while we have the diff cover off, I'm going to go ahead and replace the seals inside the differential because the passenger side axle tube puked out a little bit of fluid while this thing was sitting on the garage floor for a couple days, which means that seal is leaking. I don't know if you caught that when I pulled the diff cover off, but the first little bit of fluid that came out was water. I don't know how that got in here. These axles were probably stored outside before I picked them up. I don't know for how long. Since I've had them, they've been undercover. So that water's probably been in here for a while. And luckily, everything looks pretty good. I don't see any rust on here. And I think we kind of dodged a bullet with that one, but anyway, we got to pull this carrier out here so we can get to the oil seals, which are right on the insides of the tube on each side. Only the passenger side's leaking, but since we're in here, I'm just going to go ahead and replace them both. I've never pulled out an Aussie locker carrier before, but I think I'll see what the fitting looks like on the top of there. Maybe I'll just unscrew that and the whole thing will pull out. If not, then I guess we'll just kind of bend this around and try to hang it up in here somewhere, so we can just pop the seals out and get the new ones in. So we got the carrier out. There just ended up being, there was basically a fitting inside a fitting on the top there. I took out the top fitting and that copper tube just popped right out. Now if we look on the inside of here, we can see the oil seal on the driver's side, and there's no oil seal on the passenger side. So I looked into this a little further. By that I mean I put the flashlight on this end of the tube and look through the far end down there, and this axle came out of an early 90s Jeep Comanche, supposedly, which means it has a central axle disconnect right here, and that's where the seals are leaking. So I did a little research, and it turns out that I can buy a seal that goes right here at the outside of the differential housing, which is where I want the seal to be. So I'm going to have to order one of those along with the Pitman arm, like I said before. And when that stuff shows up, we should be able to finish this project. Fast forward a couple days and we've got our new seal installed. I found the part number for this on a forum on the internet. Somebody else ran into this same situation. And that would be this National 223050, just for reference in case anyone else ends up in this situation. It seems to fit the axle shaft really snugly, but it's a little bit loose in the tube. It fit pretty well, but there was a little bit of play in it, so basically what's holding this in place is the RTV, which is not ideal. So if this does end up leaking because the RTV breaks free, then I'll go ahead and find a different seal that fits a little more snugly in here and replace it then. But the forum post that I read, the guy said that he had this thing in his Jeep for a couple of years and it hadn't leaked, so hopefully that'll be the case with this one as well. And while we wait for that RTV to dry so we can put everything back together, I'm going to deal with the Pitman Arm issue. And the solution that I'm hoping will work is this Chevy Astro Pitman Arm right here. So some of you might know this and some of you might not. All these steering boxes that are in Chevys, Dodges, they're pretty much all made by Saginaw, and most of the Pitman arms are interchangeable. Now the thing that makes the Chevy Astro Pitman Arm unique is that it's super beefy and it's super straight. So the TJ1 kind of comes down and then hooks out this way. So the Astro arm will bring the drag link up, and I'm hoping that will be enough to make the drag link and the track bar a little more parallel. Unfortunately, my local salvage yard would not sell just the Pitman arm, so I had to buy the Pitman arm and the steering box assembly, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because I'll have this box for future use, if I ever need it. So this box, you can tell, looks very similar to a TJ box. Here's the input from the steering column, but the big difference is that the Pitman arm faces the front of the vehicle, where the TJ, the Pitman arm, faces the back of the vehicle, which makes an Astro steering box a pretty popular option for people who are looking to stretch the front ends of their Jeep. And by stretch, I mean just shift the front axle forward to get a better approach angle, to get a longer wheelbase, whatever the reason may be. So if I ever decide to do that, I now have a steering box that can help make that happen. And here's a little side-by-side action with the Astro Pitman arm on the left and this factory TJ Pitman arm on the right. See, they're pretty similar. Astro one's a little bit longer and definitely more flat. So let's get it on the Jeep. So we are at the bump stops and things are looking much better than they did the last time we did this. We no longer have any interference between the factory track bar and the diff cover because we swapped that Poison Spider Bombshell cover from the old axle that was in here onto this one. Because before we had that solid diff cover and that was a little too big. And if we take a look up here, it's a little hard to tell because it's so dark. But the drag link does come down just a little bit and the factory track bar does come up just a little bit. So we're still going in opposite directions here at full stuff. But I think once we drop down the suspension a little bit, hopefully it'll be close enough that we don't get much bump steer. If we do, then I'm just going to have to go back to a factory knuckle over here and ditch the high steer setup. So we won't find that out until we take this thing out for a test drive. Everything's back together, and in theory we should be ready to go for a test drive. However, the drag link that goes between the Pitman arm and the steering knuckle on the passenger side is a little bit too long because this was designed to be used with a lifted vehicle, not a stock vehicle. So if we look at the tire right now, you can see we're infinitely turning to the right with the steering wheel straight. And the drag link's adjusted as far as it can be to make it as short as possible. So I'm going to have to chop some of the ends off, or I'm going to have to make one myself in order to make this work. So let's see just how much this would need to be shortened. And with the tires fully straightened out, it looks like we need to take 1.5 inches minimum off of the drag link. And I'll probably go up to 1 3/4 as long as we have that much thread available inside the rod in order to allow for a little more adjustment. And last but not least, I had to grind a little bit off of the Teraflex knuckle in order to fit the wheel that I'm using, because it was rubbing just barely on the knuckle, and we got it to clear just fine. Only to take off maybe 1/8 of an inch, but unfortunately I lost a little bit of footage that I had towards the end of this, taking it for a drive and everything. Long story short, we do have bump steer, and we're going to need to address that. So the Teraflex steering is going to have to come off, and we'll replace it with some upgraded factory components, but you'll see that in a future episode. So basically for now, we're halfway done with the axle swap. The next video will be installing the rear axle, and that's going to be quite a bit more involved than the front because we're going to put the truss on it, and I kind of ran into some gearing issues with it, so you can look forward to that. And I just want to say thank you for bearing with me through this video. There was a lot of dark footage in here. I considered not even publishing this one because it's just, nobody likes to watch dark video. I think the rear axle is going to have some dark video in it too, but after that the lighting should significantly improve because I picked up some pretty good work lights. So after the rear axle, we should have a little better video quality. So how much did we spend today? Well, we installed half the axles that I bought, and half of the price of the axles was $800. And then for the life of me, I can't find the receipt for that seal that I bought to put on the passenger side axle tube. So I'm just going to lump everything together: the seal, the gear oil that we used to refill the diff, the RTV that we used for the diff cover and for holding that seal in place, and then a little bit of paint. I touched up some spots on the frame, and I painted a little bit of the diff, and we're just going to say $25 for that. It might have been a little bit more, but I think 25 is a good ballpark. So we spent $825 today, and that officially brings us over the original $5,000 target. So I really wanted to keep this thing under $5,000. Obviously that's not going to happen now, but we're going to keep moving forward, and we're going to keep spending money on it, but we're definitely going to be budget conscious with everything. The theme of the build is still going to be, really DIY stuff. So we're going to be buying used parts for it, stuff that's in good shape, but it's, definitely used, and we won't be paying the brand new price tag for it. We're going to keep building our own stuff when we can. For example, I still need to build a front bumper for this thing because, we did that bumper episode a while back, and I wasn't totally happy with the setup we had. I think it looks good, but it's not as tough as I wanted, so I'm going to be building a front bumper for this at some point. But anyway, I'm just kind of going on and on now. Long story short, stay tuned for the rear axle video coming up soon. Thanks for watching.